that profits be shared between countries. The treaty now needs to be ratified by at least 60 countries to go into effect. Here to help us understand this is David Bosco, professor of international studies at Indiana University, Bloomington. Hi, David.
Thanks very much for having me.
So if the idea is to bring some kind of order to the high seas, one key aspect of this framework is around resources, both protecting them and exploiting them. When it comes to using resources in the high seas, what are the new rules? What would they be?
So the new rules are that if you're going to take, say, marine genetic resources, some kind of genetic resource from something that you found on the high seas, some kind of marine organism, that there has to be some kind of sharing of that with the international community. How exactly you share it is very much left vague in the new agreement, but ideally you need to kind of register what you've done on the high seas, and there should be some kind of profit sharing mechanism if you make money off of that high seas genetic material.
When we're talking about marine genetic resources, what does that mean?
So it's essentially a genetic resource from some kind of marine organism. So to give you an example, there's some sea sponges, for example. There were kind of genetic sequences in there that were used to develop anti-leukemia drugs. So I think that's the kind of thing that the agreement has in mind, that there's some genetic sequencing or some organic resource from the oceans that is then used to be commercialized.
Is there a risk that no one's going to want to explore that if they have to share the profits?
Yeah, this is a point that some of the developed economies have made in these negotiations. And so this is something that's going to be worked out. How do you keep that balance between keeping commercial incentives? Because often there would be a lot of investment involved. It's not just a harvesting of the genetic resource. It's then money that you got to pour into figuring out how it can be used, how it can be commercialized.
What other potential economic implications would you see coming out of this treaty?
The other area has to do with, for example, shipping and shipping costs. And here you get into the question of environmental impact statements, because that's another area covered by the treaty. Any kind of marine research, I would say, is something that could be affected by this new agreement.
The oceans are so vast. Do you think that even if this agreement is ratified, it could be enforced out there?
Yeah, the enforcement is a big question. You've got to have countries that are willing to invest resources into monitoring compliance. And that means, coast guards, that means potentially navies that are willing to get involved in this. That is something that very much remains to be worked out.
David Bosco is a professor of international studies at Indiana University, Bloomington, who authored the book The Poseidon Project, The Struggle to Govern the World's Oceans. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much for having me.
Our executive producer is Kelly Silvera. Our digital producer is Jarrett Dang. Our engineers are Jessen Dueller and Nick Esposito. In New York, I'm Sabri Benishore with the Marketplace Morning Report. From APM, American Public Media.
WNYC is supported by Charles P. Rogers, New York bed makers for 7 generations at 17th Street, Manhattan and Route 17, New Jersey. Handcrafted mattresses and beds since 1855. More at charlesprogers.com.
On the next Brian Lehrer Show, New York City Controller Brad Lander will talk